talking about personality types, personality styles, how each one of your kids has a different style and how you have your own style, obviously. And sometimes those styles don't work very well together. So I have Karen Wagner here with me today. She is a human behavior specialist, a parent coach. She is the founder of the Parenting Blueprint, and she's now coaching other coaches to become knowledgeable in this area. Karen, thank you so much for being with me. I love bringing information. Information is power. I want to help families create more health and harmony in the home. Tell us all about the different personality styles.
First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to share with your audience today. You know, the understanding of human behavior, first of all, was fascinating to me, but it truly transformed the way I saw my kids, because I truly thought that Kyle was on earth just to make me miserable. When I had my first child, I could not wait to be a mom. I finally became a mom. And then I had Kyle, who was the anti-everything. I mean, even from a toddler, this child tested me. And it really wasn't until I attended a workshop and was introduced to human behavior, and this was in a business setting, that I thought like I was being punked, like someone had the camera on me watching my responses, because everything that was being said from the stage was exactly what I was experiencing in the home. And I was like, how come no one teaches this to parents? The model that I use, the DISC model of human behavior, and many of you may have experienced this, is done in corporate. Okay, so it's done from leadership, it's done from sales, it's done from team building. But this is adult-child relationships, the most important relationships we will ever have. And no one was using this as a tool of understanding as to what was going on in my family dynamics. And so I have found this information to just be so powerful, not only in transforming my life, but in the clients that I've been working with. Each of us are wired from birth with our personality traits. It's just like our hair color, our eye color, our nose shape. I mean, it's just part of who we are. And each of those personalities will have internal emotional needs that drive external behavior. When those internal emotional needs are not being met, we will experience what we call disruptive behaviors, because the child is trying to get the need met. We tend to want to address that surface behavior, whether it's being defiant or it's illogical or kids just shut down or they just become over accommodating, you know, whatever that is that we're seeing. And it's like, oh, this isn't such a good behavior that I want for my kid. And we tend to address that behavior. But if you don't get to the why and start meeting the need as to why this is happening, that behavior will continue or escalate. And I think when I was meeting with you and your family, you started to see the differences in the diversity, even within you and your son. You know, because your son is wired a lot like my Kyle, I think.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, every child is so different.
Yes.
But I think it's also so important is to understand, I think, first and foremost, your own personality style. And
Yes.
then you know what theirs is and you're able to adapt.
Yes.
So can you give us an example of
yes.
like your child, Kyle, who you had the
Absolutely.
most challenge with, and my son too, my oldest, definitely I did not understand him.
I think I want to just dial back a moment on what you said. I needed to understand myself.
Yeah.
You know, why was he triggering me? What was in my personality that was triggering me to react the way I did when he did the things he did? Right? You know, there were triggers so I had to become aware, like when we look at the 3 pillars of the Parenting Blueprint, it's becoming aware of the personality dynamics in the family, you and your kids. Spouse, hubby, everybody, you know, and to see the diversity that you have, and then being willing to adapt our interactions to the third pillar and apply the right strategies to reduce that conflict, increase the productivity, and maintain the positive relationship where that child does feel seen, heard, and understood for who they are, not who we want them to be. Now, look, my family values and morals, that did not change, but it's the way I had to interact and communicate those expectations that needed to change within my family. Now, let's just talk real briefly about the personality types. And I can provide you a link to our Parenting Blueprint Toolkit, which would give your audience an opportunity to take a look at the overview of parenting different personality styles, and they'll have a little bit more in depth in that. But we look at 2 observations. And the first observation is, what is your pace in life? How does your motor run? Some people are outgoing personalities. They walk fast, talk fast, eat fast. I call them the bouncers, okay? Then we have personalities that are more reserved, or the introverts. And they just prefer a slower pace. They're like the mosiers, they're not real motivated to do anything. They just kind of take their time and think things through. Not right or wrong, but it's different. So if you are a more reserved personality, parenting an outgoing personality that's very fast paced and they're bouncing off the walls and you just want peace and harmony, can you see where we have what I call the gap and a conflict? Can you see where a parent who is more reserved may think there's something wrong with their child, that maybe they have ADHD, hyperactive, because their motor runs faster than the parent's motor? Not right or wrong. It's just different. So that's the first observation that we like to look at when we are looking at the personality styles. The second is your priority. How you spend your time in life is pretty much going to determine your personality. Some people are very task-driven individuals. This is kind of where I am. We are the list-making people. We make lists, we check things off. We're all about form, function, plans, progress. You know what I mean? We are very structured. On the other hand, we have the personalities that are more relational. They're more open with sharing their feelings and emotions and interacting with others. They're not real task-driven, because relationships are more important than tasks. Again, not right or wrong, but different. But if you are a parent who's very tasked and structured, and you have a child that's flying by the seat of their pants, you are trying to make them more structured. Not saying that they don't need to be more organized, but if we are continuing to be critical of these traits, which is very natural to them to interact and engage with others, the child starts to think there's something wrong with them. And what have we now done? The child does not feel seen, heard, and understood. So when we take those two observations, the pace, outgoing, reserved, and priority, tasking people, we do it on a wheel. That gives us the 4 different personalities of the DISC model of human behavior. The dominant and inspiring are the outgoing personalities. The supportive and cautious are more of the reserved personality. But when you are parenting a personality that's wired differently than you, can you see there's going to be a gap and a level of misunderstanding?
I love what she was saying about the triggers, because I always think about this too. Like, if paying attention to that particular behavior and how that triggers you, that will give you such amazing information.
And I'm sure that we all have unhealed things. But for me, my trigger was, as a dominant, I am more dominant and inspiring. So I'm super, super fast paced. Okay. Right. Where Kyle was cautious and dominant. So we could connect on that, get things done. But his way was the right way. He was a perfectionist, where I just want to have fun. And he was too serious, and he was black and white, and one way was the way. He didn't vary one way or another, and it's the way he saw life. And honestly, Dale, many people told me that he could be ODD, oppositional defiant, because his way was the right way, and he wasn't yielding for that. And although there were traits that overlapped ODD, I also said, that's how he's wired. When I looked at his personality assessment, these are his traits that make him who he is. Now, I could label him, but what was that going to do? Give him an excuse that I'm ODD, I can do what I want because I have this? No, look, parents, look, these neurodiversities are real. I do not ever want to discount that it's real out there. I just feel that we are throwing around some labels a little bit more than necessary, because we do not understand a human behavior model and how our kids are wired. But what I needed to do, Dale, is I needed to change my approach in the way I parented him. I needed to offer him choices within my boundaries. He did not take a directive. A directive was, let's fight. I could say something and he heard, let's fight, because we ended up in a fight. And I don't know if that was like that with your son too. You know what I mean? Because he debated freaking everything. You know what I mean? It was not up for debate, but somehow I'm hooked into an argument with this child. So I needed to give him choices within my boundaries and allow him to experience the logical consequences when he chose something that wasn't going to work out. Not with an I told you so, not with if you just listen to me, but with empathy, saying, I'm sorry things didn't work out for you. What do you think you could do differently next time? And try to communicate and collaborate with him rather than hammer him. Because of my dominant personality, I would hammer him. I was going to get him to my way of thinking because my way was the right way. I am the mom, for crying out loud, right? Did not work.
Doesn't work. Doesn't work.
Didn't work.
I love how you're basically what you're doing is just honoring who they are.
Yes.
And I love that because you have to. Otherwise, there isn't going to be a battle the whole time.
It is going to.
So understanding it is the key. Yep. So understanding the different ones. So,
and what triggered me was when he defied me and disrespected what I said. That threw me off the deep end.
I believe that these labels, you know, why they sometimes parents feel like, oh, thank goodness, like this explains it. Right. But yet other times it's like giving the kid like, okay, well, I have this. That's why I can't do that. Right. You know, and I don't believe you can't do anything. I mean, you have to work with a different type of brain. Like you said, you're working with a different type of personality. You can find ways to deal with, and that's why they have special programs for kids that have neurodiversity. So they're teaching them differently.
And what happens, and I'm just sharing this from the clients that I've worked with who really struggled with working with a different personality than themselves. Mm-hmm. And usually when we have an opposite style, so let me give you an example. If we have the cautious parent, so the cautious parent is more reserved, task-oriented, very structured, almost perfectionist. Things need to be a certain way. And they are parenting an inspiring child, which is polar opposite, which is more outgoing, people-oriented, not task-driven at all, okay? They can be very frustrated, feeling as though this child's going to fail. They're not organized, but they're not celebrating the strengths of that personality. The fact that they make friends easily, that they're very engaged, that they're willing to take risks that nobody else would do. You know what I mean? That they're just outgoing and willing to engage in things where a more cautious personality would overthink it and not take the risk at all.
Yeah.
And so what we do is it's almost as though we will put that on our child, as you were talking about, Dr. Shefali. We could take our fears of don't take that risk and you can't do that. And that child is missing opportunities to be something they could be because the parent's not reading who they are and supporting that. Wow. And so when parents do the assessments and we plot everybody on a graph and you saw yours and you start to see the different plotting points, the first thing is the aha moment. There's nothing wrong with me, nothing wrong with my child. We're just different. Now, where do I go from here? Because look, we want to be the best parents we can be for our kids. But can I just say this and be truly honest with you? No one teaches you how to raise a human.
I know.
I mean, no one teaches us how to raise a human. I think we are led to believe as women that we have child, it'll come naturally and just follow your instinct. BS. Okay. Can I just put that out there? That is not true. And then we hide behind the guilt and the shame that everybody has it together because it's supposed to come natural and follow your instincts. And I was not doing okay. Okay. I was not okay. I was living behind the shame and the guilt that everybody had it together but me, but I didn't want to tell anybody. I didn't want to tell anybody that I was going to bed feeling like a failure and crying and the next day thinking it was going to be better, only to have parenting Groundhog Day. And by 10 o'clock, I'm right back where I was the day before because I didn't understand why my kids thought and acted the way they did. And once I did, I could adapt my interactions and apply the right strategies so I could have that harmony you talk about in the home and encourage them to be the best they can be according to their design.
I love
which
it.
is the whole foundation of the parenting blueprint. Yeah. You know, and my kids are so diverse. I mean, and we're a blended family. We have 7 kids. We have number 12 grandchild is coming in the next couple of weeks, and they are so different. And now that I see this, I see the beauty in the diversity. And I love the wild kids. And then I also respect the analytical ones. And they will never be wild and risk takers. They won't because they're data driven and that's their comfort zone. And that's where they stay, where the wild ones are probably going to have a few more bumps on their head than the other ones because they're willing to take that risk and jump off the swing and jump off the slide and do those things. And they will learn from the school of hard knocks. But it's also how I can celebrate their strengths and not be critical of who they're not, but celebrate them for who they are.
And what does that do? And what does that do but create a child who feels good about themselves?
Yeah.
And that's what we need. Children with good self-esteem.
Yes.
Good, feeling really valuable and seen and heard. And wow, this is so great. Every parent needs to do this.
They do. And you know what? And I, as a young parent, I'm going to say young parent, I was 27, 28 when I had my first kid. And I thought that, I had mastered my career. I thought this parent thing was going to be like this. And it was not. So parents out there, I just want to just support and encourage you that you're doing the best you can with what you know. But when you know better, know more, you can do more. Okay. And that's what opened the door for me to understand that Kyle wasn't just being a jerk to me, because there were days I did not like that boy. I loved him. He was my son, but I did not like him some days. But I learned to appreciate him for who he is and know that I can count on him because I understand how he thinks. And then my other son, Eric, was the complete opposite. He was definitely more relational, but not as organized. Eric has more stitches than all the other kids put together because he was just the wild boy. You know what I mean? He'd driving that big wheel off the things and jumping off the things. And he was just, that's how he was. He was just active and engaging and fun and funny to this day. He still cracks me up. So it's just some of those things. And then my daughter was the people pleaser perfectionist. That's just my 3. And then you bring in the 4 from our blended family, and that's a whole nother episode right there. But parents, I just want to encourage you that there are tools out there. And just, Dale, as you had done with your family, because you wanted to have better relationships with your kids, and they were older, they weren't younger kids. I mean, we were doing this when your kids were older, right? Because you still value and want to have that connection where they want to come back and be with us and not feel as though they have to come into our house working on eggshells. Because how many times do you go home and parents that are in the audience, you go back to your family and you feel as though you're walking on eggshells because maybe you felt as though you didn't measure up to your parents because they didn't understand you. Mm-hmm. That cycle will repeat if we don't catch that and start valuing our kids for who they are, not who we think they should be.
Yeah.
We want to encourage them and support them to be the best they can be. We want to help them find careers that suit their personality, that they can grow and they can thrive and feel as though they're contributing in society. But at the same time, when we become critical and judgmental, we will break and disconnect, and they will start talking to other people, and we have lost that relationship. And that's the last thing we want to do.
Yeah, every parent wants what's best for their kid, and they want to have a healthy relationship. But we got to have the tools. We got to have the knowledge. Yeah. Like you said, we leave the hospital, and there's no manual.
Yeah, look, I know how to keep them alive. I got the sleep schedule down. I got the nursing down. And then the little personalities came out around 2 and 3. And I'm thinking, what is happening here? It was very difficult because they were just so different in the way they played and the way they interacted, what they needed from me. And I just didn't understand the tool of the personality assessments. And we have them for kids as young as 4. So our child's assessment is from 4 to 10, and then we go to a teen assessment. And then, of course, we have our adult assessments. But we put together the interaction guide where you can see the plotting points of the family. You can see mom and dad. And let me tell you, couples out there, we tend to marry our opposite. I think that's God's design for completion, unless he has quite a sense of humor by putting us together like that.
That's what we did, but I did it with my husband.
But with that is going to come different expectations as parents. And so when I've been able to see parents heal and understand each other as a couple as to why one parent can be more cautious while the other one is a little bit more freeform, and it's not right or wrong, but what does the child need? Who's the parent that the child needs? How can we come together, be on the same page, and become the parent that that child needs so they can be the best they can be?
Karen, this was absolutely gold, amazing, just so important. I just hope that this gets into the hands of every single parent out there. So again, thank you. You're a gem. Love you so much.
Dale, thanks for having me.
All right. We'll see you again. We'll come on again.